Thank you, everybody. Welcome to Ask Pav, the live recovery ride, which I've got to be careful because I haven't set my Wahoo up properly, so there's a very good chance that if we go up any hills on Zwift, I'm going to be going outside of recovery zone. So we'll be watching me pant, no doubt. So thanks everybody for coming. Nice little group of us for the first ever one. Good to test this all out. As I said a minute ago, post any questions into the chat function. Oh, let me just bring it back up. First question from Eric. Can you tell me a little bit about the strategy of training in the sweet spot? Yeah, so lots of good reasons why you would train in sweet spot. So first of all, for those who don't really know what sweet spot is, it's usually defined as 88 to 93% of your functional threshold power. For those who aren't sure about FTP, functional threshold power, that's an approximation of the power that you could hold for an hour. So you might do a ramp test, you might do a 20-minute test, you might do a 3-minute test, various tests you could do to, including doing an hour time trial that could approximate that FTP. So once you know your FTP, you could train in what's called the sweet spot zone, which, as I said, was 88 to 93% of that FTP. So if you had an FTP of 100, it'd be 88 watts to 93 watts. And do you know, I don't know the origins, I'll be honest, but we particularly have used this in growing numbers for our time-strapped athletes. So if you're a professional cyclist, or you had no job, or you had a lot of time, or whatever, you'd potentially be able to go out and ride 30, 40 hours a week, a lot of base training, a lot of zone 1, zone 2, easy riding, which obviously helps build up a lot of that aerobic endurance. Now, the modern, and use the word amateur loosely, but the modern amateur doesn't have 30 hours. In fact, most amateurs we work with have 10 or less hours. So realistically, if you spent less than 10 hours in zone 1, zone 2 every week, you're not going to get the adaptation that you might want. Certainly a far great deal less than spending 30 hours a week in those zones, and realistically a little bit of a waste of time. So in order to kind of promote a similar adaptation, you might train a little bit higher intensity in sweet spot. Now, some people obviously think that, well, why not go for full FTP, train 100% of FTP, because you're still sort of aerobic. I mean, you shouldn't be, if you do a 25-mile time trial at your FTP, you certainly shouldn't be anaerobic at the start. And anaerobic would be where you're not using oxygen to produce energy. And obviously this is a very limited supply of what you can do with that. So you might finish a time trial, you might consider even going up a short hill anaerobic, and definitely consider weight training anaerobic when you're using heavier weights or you're doing it fast. But FTP training in itself is quite fatiguing. So that would be the main reason why you wouldn't train an awful lot at FTP, because the recovery time from that is actually a little bit more considerable. You use a lot more glycogen, and the strain on energy production systems and stuff like that, muscles, is actually a lot more harder at FTP than it is at sweet spot. So sweet spot is aptly named because it's intense enough to produce an adaptation which is somewhat similar, and it's very important to remember it's somewhat similar. You wouldn't spend 30 hours a week in the sweet spot. If you had 30 hours a week, a considerable amount of that is obviously going to be zone 2 or less. But it's intense enough, sweet spot is intense enough to produce an adaptation which is good enough for the modern amateur in terms of promoting your body's ability to burn or use glycogen and convert that to energy, move oxygen around the body and stuff like that, without actually creating an awful lot of fatigue. So that would be the main reason, the main reason why that sweet spot training has become so popular, and you hear it a lot more, is just because people don't have that time to put in 20 or 30 hours in aerobic endurance. So hopefully that answers your question, Eric.
Well, yeah, that answers my question. I guess a follow-up question would be, you know, how often would you want to repeat, you know, an FTP test, or a, you know, all the different, you know, Zwift, it's short FTP, long, regular FTP, or ramp test, to kind of recalibrate those zones as one is in an active training phase using power-based training?
Yeah, great question. So you actually were really specific there, which is fantastic, because you asked about how often you want to test for set zones. Now, if we talk about testing in general, I would actually sort of say that you're probably at least testing once every 4 weeks, maybe even weekly. If we talk about our Gran Fondo riders, where I have a new guy who's ridden most is about 20 miles, and he wants to do a 65-mile ride in October. So his test is predominantly, can he increase his endurance every week? That's pretty much what his main test is. Of course, we test periodically his zones, his FTP, and we test other areas like his ability to climb a hill, his flexibility, his bike fit even comes into it. All of these things are a test that you might have from a coaching point of view on a weekly basis. To answer your specific question about when you would test zones, again, now for you, Eric, it's a great question, because normally if you're a seasoned athlete and you've been training for a long time, the difference in your zones throughout a year, throughout multiple seasons, might be very minimal, and it could be quite distracting and demotivating to do a test every 4 weeks that is specific to FTP and setting zones, because you might only see a marginal increase, you might see a marginal decrease, and it might not be worth actually having that test that frequent. So once every 8 to 12 weeks might be enough. But to give everybody a little background on Eric, Eric's just had a very serious injury and an operation, and has done some testing himself before starting coaching with me, and saw a significant drop in his FTP from where he was pre-op to post-op. So in that situation, we would expect to see, Eric, your performance increase quite rapidly over the next 4 to 8 weeks as we introduce more structure to your training and get you back to that consistency. So for you, we're probably going to test every 4 weeks as you come back until we get you to roughly where you were or a little bit better. And then we would spread that testing out a bit more, just because we're going to see a significant rise in your FTP, which would actually mean that your zones will change quite considerably. So if you are somebody who is new to structured training, or you have had an injury, actually there's a very, very reasonable or very good reason why you would actually test FTP and zones more frequently, because the whole point is obviously to have as accurate zones, or if you use Training Peaks and use the workout builder, which is a percentage of FTP, or we talk about sweet spot training a minute ago, that percentage of FTP is only valid as long as the FTP itself is valid. So if you're expecting some significant growth like we are with you, Eric, then more frequent tests at the early stages are definitely a good option.
Can I ask one last follow-up question to that, and then I'll get into the background? So, you know, subjectively, if in my case, or probably it would apply to others, sorry for the, Sam, I'm on a phone call. My young son, a cyclist in his own right. Sam, can you wave? There he is. Yeah, he's working on N+1 right now for bicycles. So if subjectively the zones feel too easy, you know, after a week or two, then is that another, like, oh, okay, well, it's time to find a way to build in a ramp test or an FTP test, or and then I guess the second part of that question, is it always best to just do the same? You know, I've never done a ramp test, so I've always used the FTP test in Zwift or the 4DP in Sufferfest, which feels similar. So anyway, so those, I guess it's a two-part question. And then I promise to fade to the background with my questions.
Great questions, thank you. So yes, the first one, if you were noticing significantly that riding at Sweet Spot has gotten incredibly easy, then yeah, that's a very good idea to maybe do some repeat testing. It ties in with your second question, which is that should you keep the testing the same? Now, for me, yes, but with a caveat that you've got to pick, for me, the right test, the most relevant test at the start. So if you're a time trialer, a tester, and you're doing 10 or 25-mile time trials, logically, the best test for you to pick is the 20-minute FTP test, because it's the most relevant to your goals. If you can't do a 20-minute FTP test because it's too hard or whatever, and you're targeting a 10-mile time trial, then you've got a severe limiter. So not only are you going to set your zones via that, but actually you're also going to be working on that mentality, which is to push really hard when it gets really tough, which is what happens obviously at the end of a 10-mile time trial. So I would be structuring, I wouldn't necessarily say you get 2 weeks through, you set your zones, 2 weeks later, you're noticing it's got very easy. I wouldn't necessarily do that test right away, and I wouldn't do it in the third build week if you're following a 3-to-1, 3-week build, 1 week easy periodization model. I wouldn't necessarily cut it in at during a build week, just because you also want to see if you can use your testing to identify trends in which you could use for a later taper model. So when we talk about tapering, you've got your big event, you might take anywhere between, I mean, some people very less than 10 days, the 10 days to sort of 2 or 3 weeks would be a standard taper model if you've been training a lot, and very hardly for an event. If you've not got an idea of what that looks like for you, using your easier weeks to start to determine what works is a great idea. So you might use your ramp test, 20-minute test, whatever test that is at the end of your easier week. But you could use the 4, 5, 6 days before that as a play around with it, as what does that look like? Do you need all of really easy short sessions? Do you need quite a hard taper with a bit of intensity? And you can play around with that kind of lead into that test to identify what your taper would look like. But that obviously depends on you not messing around with the format of the test, because if you change the test itself, you actually don't know whether your taper's working, because you could just be responding to the test in a different manner. So you want to keep as many things as possible the same, so you can identify trends in what's working and what can be a bit better. So yeah, I would try and pick the same test to set your FTP for the whole macro cycle. So from the point at which you've taken your end of season break or your injury or whatever through to main event, and then perhaps pick a different test for the next year or whatever. Certainly off season and typical winter lockdown, when there's no events, is a great opportunity to try something new. So yeah, absolutely play around with different tests, because it's not going to matter when you're this far away from an event. So hopefully that's yes, thank you, makes sense. I tell you, I'm not actually pedaling that hard, but talking, thinking, and training is proving a lot harder than I thought it would be. I'm going to have to do a fair bit of editing before I put this out to the world. All right. Anybody else have a question?
If I have like no specific goal I'm working towards, no rides, no events, no specific FTP increase or whatsoever, just general things like getting fitter or getting better, is that enough for a coach if I would sign up for the 8 weeks program, or is that just like, I have no idea what to do with you?
Well, no, we would, as coaches, the first thing we would do is we would ask you some questions to identify why you wanted to be coached and what that looked like. I mean, you might not have any events, which all of our clients are pretty much in the same boat there. So it's about what you want to do, what your dreams are. Maybe that's nothing this year. That's fine. But next year you might have something. And you might have something in the next 4 to 8 years. Well, the questions on our intake form does go up to about 8 years, I think. Now, I see funny answers on there, like be alive. That's a normal answer for some of our clients in 8 years' time is fantastic. And of course, we can help with that with your structured training and exercise. But maybe I can ask you, why do you ride your bike?
Because it's one of the few types of exercise I can actually do. I have foot malformation, so there's a lot of exercise I can do, and my ex-boyfriend got me into cycling, and that kind of works more or less.
Okay, and what about cycling is it that really lights you up? Why, other than the health benefits, is there, like, do you record your rides on Strava? Do you usually do events? Do you look at your data at all, or?
I think it's the social part mostly, to ride with friends and have a social kind of thing. I used to be a team sport player and can't do that anymore. So I do post on Strava, but I just don't look at the numbers. Can't really be bothered. So
it's just the social aspect. That's absolutely fine. Do you ever find when you go out for a ride that there's people that you can't ride with or would like to ride with, but you're just not quite there in terms of performance? Maybe you have a bit of anxiety about riding with some people, and there's an element there that we could work on.
Well, yeah, there's definitely the part of me being slow, but at the same time, I pick social rides where there's a kind of like no drop policy, or when you ride with stronger friends, they say, yeah, but it's a social ride. So I will adjust to you, because it's all about having fun together and not really about performance at that time. So.
Absolutely. So I'll tell you a story about some of our clients who are similar in your sort of shoes, who we've worked with, and they don't have necessarily goals at the moment. There's nothing that they really like to do, but focus on that enjoyment from cycling, and being able to actually really enjoy just being able to ride further, visit new places, not be worried about if there was a trip to, I don't know, like the Dolomites, where hills tend to be quite long and steep, or it's simply just the fact that when they get asked to go out for a ride with their friends, sometimes they don't want to, because they're a little anxious, a little nervous about not being able to keep up. Nobody wants to be the slower guy or person in the group, and it's really what coaching will give you, what any structured training will give you, whether that's with a coach or a training plan or whatever, is confidence. It's one of the main reasons why a lot of our clients pick that up, is because they want to know that the training that they're going to do is going to see some significant increases. Now, of course, 90% of our clients do have a goal in mind, but it sounds like really everybody has a goal. It's just about identifying what that actually is. And I think that you do have one. it's just not really tangible and as obvious as someone who wants to do an event. So I definitely, coaching is for me, and I know I would say this, but it's a total game changer. I mean, I'm coached by one of our guys just because it's about accountability for me. I know what I should be doing, but when I self-coach, I tend to deviate. I tend to pick a route that is what I want to do rather than what I should be doing. I pick an intensity which is what I want to do rather than I should be doing. And it's very easy to over or under train without the guidance of someone else. And to be honest, I don't know many coaches. I don't know many pro athletes who don't have a coach themselves or who have not been coached. Like a lot of our coaches have been professional athletes or are professional athletes, and it's good to have that perspective. And for me, I love working with other coaches because I learn more. I definitely don't like the idea. I'm certainly not egotistical enough to think that I know everything. And the young lad that I work with, who is early 20s, who's doing his doctorate, is always coming up with these really weird new scientific studies. So I feel like for me, I'm always at the forefront of innovation without me having to read a research paper, because as soon as I pick up my training for the next week, there's some random like, oh, here's what we're going to do with your nutrition, or here's what we're going to do with your intensity, or here's what we're going to do this week. And I get to learn something new. So plenty of reasons to be coached or have at least a training plan or a structure, even if you don't feel like you have a tangible goal. How is that?
Yeah, it does make sense. I know when the Zwift Academy kind of programs were up, I was really focused on just graduating the academy, and that really drove into more structured training and, you know, doing things that I would normally not do because, well, yeah, at the moment it's just like, well, I have a distance goal for the next month, but that's about it because it's a sponsored event kind of thing. But I'm well on the way to fix that, so and get to that goal. So there's no real need to work specific on that. But indeed, having the accountability and having somebody thinking for you as well, that you only need to pick on Zwift which route you're going to take, and that's about it. Which scenery you want to do, and then just suffer along the way. That I think that is what makes me considering buying the workout program thing. And like you said, yeah, there is some goal, like getting better in some vague kind of not tangible kind of way.
Absolutely.
So it does make sense, yeah.
Oh, good, yeah. And then that's the other thing that I'd like to also add. I've worked with a lot of people who've also had that thought that you've had around just getting better. And I think that once you get started with a coach, you're going to see such significant improvements, and you're going to enjoy it. You're going to have so much more confidence. You're probably going to change your goals into something more tangible. Whether that is just like, oh, wow, I can't believe that I might be able to hit this power, like as FTP, or I might be able to hit this sprint power. Let's work towards that. Or maybe it's, I want to try and get a category up in Zwift racing or anything like that. It's funny how quickly you can actually see these real results that spark an underlying or maybe subconscious interest in doing something else.
Yeah, definitely true.
Yeah.
I joined a team for the social part on Zwift just because of having the social connection throughout the winter season. So that's, yeah, and it's kind of like demotivating to see all my teammates go up categories, and I'm just stuck at the same FTP for at least 2 years now.
Absolutely. Can you still hear me? I think my AirPods have just died.
I can still hear you.
You can hear me? Okay, cool.
Yeah. You
Crazy.
have like 10 minutes remaining on this session.
Yeah, so we're being cheap at the moment and we're not upgrading Zoom. So we will upgrade Zoom. I know when we start to see a load more people, we know this is going to work. Personally, I feel like this is going to work, but it's going to be more of that. It's going to run slowly through summer. I think that we probably were a little bit foolish to start this on a bank holiday and Memorial Day in America as well. So I think we've probably got a lot of people, especially given what's happening in the UK at the moment, going out and not being on a Zwift or on this, but we'll keep running this regularly. We'd love to keep the questions coming. I'm going to tell you a little bit about next week. We've still got just over 6 minutes, so feel free to type a question in or raise your hand if you've got a question. Next week, we're going to have my coach and one of the spokes expert coaches, Aitor, coming on. And he's going to tell us a little bit about the latest science in fueling. We've for a long time believed that 90 grams of carbohydrate was the most that the human gut could absorb in an hour. 60 grams of glucose, 30 grams of fructose, which on the face of it sounds like it'd be really easy to do, to work out, but it's not as easy as it seems because fructose is obviously, you can't use fruit juice because that's not pure fructose. And then where do you get your powder from? So people tend to buy better fuel, beta fuel, or powders, which is fine. We're talking about now, there's science, I think it's marathon runners who have been able to train their guts to 120 grams of carbohydrate. He's going to come on. He's going to tell us a little bit about what that looks like and how one would go around training that, because the exciting thing about being able to train to 120 grams of carbohydrate is that you're talking about close to 500 calories an hour there. Now, depending, obviously we're not, if you're doing a short, intense effort, a time trial, you're going to burn more than that. But if we're talking about doing Everesting, maybe, or a 12-hour time trial, a Grand Fondo, you might actually be able to consume all of your energy requirements and not have to rely on fat stores, which is something that for decades now we've considered necessary to train. And as we talked about at the beginning, one of the primary reasons for doing a lot of lower intensity training is actually the benefits. One of the adaptations is you become better at burning fat for fuel, which is entirely necessary if you're doing long rides, or so we've thought. So it's going to be really good to hear what he has to say in terms of what that study says, whether or not this means that there's actually a potential end for doing low intensity riding. I mean, there's still adaptation that you'll get from that, of course, or whether we're all just going to be focused more on training our guts to metabolize or actually break down that much sugar. Typically, the issues around most people, yeah, I can send out a link, or I'll get Aitor. In fact, I think it's in the group, Eric. So for anyone that wants a bit more information before next week, it is in the group. Aitor posted it into our performance training advice Facebook group. And I forgot what it was. Shoot. Well, right, that was it. So typically what we used to think is that actually if you were to go into a race or event or anything and consume more than the 90 grams of carbohydrate mix, you would actually be likely to get some GI distress, which for anyone who's done a long event and has gotten hungry and overeaten towards the end will know is a pain. I've done many long time trials and yeah, made that mistake where you get super hungry and you eat a little bit more towards the end, and starts to want to come out on you. And so it'd be great to hear from Aitor. And yeah, for more information on that, it is in the group. So I'll try and see if I can tag you, Eric, and anybody else that can't find it, just send me a message and I will I'll tag them in it too. But yeah, next week, same time, same place, live from my pain cave. We will have Coach Aitor on. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. So rather than us trying to fit in another question, what I'm going to do is just end the Zoom now. But I am going to say it's really good to have such a nice small group, and appreciate all the questions, and hopefully see you all next week, and definitely within the groups. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.